The Economy and Neighbourhoods Scrutiny panel, so Happy New Year to everybody. As we are actually broadcasting this, I would like panel members to introduce themselves first. I will introduce myself first. I'm Councillor Rob Walker, who's the lead member of this panel.
Switch yours off, Rob. Good morning, Martin Bolt, Councillor for Murfield, member of the panel.
Judith Hughes, Almonbury Councillor.
Darren O'Donovan, Dewsbury West Councillor.
Right, thanks. So, first item are the minutes of the previous meeting, which we've got as part of our pack. So this was the meeting of the 14th of December. So if you just want to have a quick look at those. We'll let you off. Right, so is everybody happy with those? Yeah. Right. Are there any particular issues there that are not on the agenda that we need to pick up? Okay, thank you. Right, membership of the committee. Have we had any apologies, Steve?
I think that Mark Mercer, the co-op team, may not be around this morning. He wasn't well on Monday, so I'll record his apologies and not heard anything from anybody else.
Okay, yes. I think that Councillor O'Neill at the council meeting yesterday had a sick note, so she obviously is not going to be attending. Right, interests. Are there any disclosable interests?
Sorry, just for the benefit of the webcast in a minute, Chair, it's probably as well declaring that I am a member of West Yorkshire Combined Authority Transport Panel. So some of the issues that I'll have seen there.
Right, thanks, Martin. And I think I should say as well that I am the chair of the Slathway and Marsden Action on Rail Transport Group. Right, admissions of the public. There are no issues here which would be taken in a private session, but we haven't any members of the public here anyway, so that doesn't really matter. So we will move on to the main issue for this morning, which is looking at transport in Kirklees and West Yorkshire. And this morning we're going to have a particular focus on the rail transport services within the area. And we're going to have a presentation which will be followed by questions. So at the start of the presentation, I would like the officers who kindly come along, welcome to the meeting this morning, if you could introduce yourselves before making the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Simon Taylor. I'm Head of Strategic Investment. I look after the transportation team and some of the planning functions as well.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Richard Hadfield. I'm Head of Strategy and Design at the Council. Okay, we've got a presentation that we've handed out. Is it up on the board or does it come over the wicket? It's about rail issues for Kirklees anyhow. So just quickly turning over to the first page, we're going to cover rail franchising, the Transpennine Upgrade Electrification Project, known as TRU, High Speed 2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, and then local rail issues. In your presentation pack, I particularly also put the dates there that these sort of initiatives come into being, because I think that's important just to look, because so you've got rail franchises up to 2025, you have the Transpennine upgrade again, which should be in place by 2025, HS2 2033, Northern Powerhouse Rail 2046. So we're covering a vast range of projects and initiatives here over the next sort of 30 years. Picking up...
Yeah, if I could just interject, Richard, for a second. Could we cover one of those topics at a time?
Yeah.
So if we cover one of the topics, then stop questions. I think that would work better.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, thank you.
So going on to the rail franchises, first one we talked about is the Transpennine Express franchise, which is up to 2023. This is a franchise that's set by the government, that sort of West Yorkshire Combined Authority input into, and the output over the next 6 or 7 years are shown on the slide. By December 17, the measure was to get new 125-mile-an-hour rolling stock starts entering service and to improve the capacity to lead in the A&P by 30%. That's actually got delayed. It isn't in place at the moment. We are expecting that to probably be delayed by 6 to 9 months due to the problems in the industry. Then by December 18, all the diesel units that were in service would be refurbed. Wi-Fi would be available free on all trains. Capacity to lead would be increased by 50% through longer trains, and a 6-hourly train would be introduced from Huddersfield. The refurb units are already starting to appear, but it's certainly not complete, and so some of the increased capacity due to the knock-on effects I've already mentioned won't come into effect until 2020. And the 6-hourly train is more likely to be later on in 2018. By December 2020, all new 125-mile trains should be in operation, and that should carry us through with the 6th service and the increased capacity to 2023 when this franchise ends, and a new franchise will be set up, negotiated for, etc. Okay?
Yes, Martin.
Okay. Sorry, did you say we're taking questions on each one as we go through?
Yes.
Because the headline for this is rail franchises.
Yes.
The headline is rail franchises, and with respect, all we've got here is one franchise. There are, in Kirklees, there are 2 other rail companies operating. We touched briefly before, obviously with our shared interests. The rail franchise, one of the impacts that I think we need to be looking at is the impact within Kirklees on stopping services with the change in franchises. Transpennine that we mention here will be picking up some of the stopping service. I know particularly in your area residents are concerned about Slough to Marsden changes in service. The impact then on Northern Rail, and I'm sure it comes as no surprise to officers that I will raise again that when we talk about rail issues in Kirklees, we need to factor in the fact that we have a direct service to London that comes and stops in Kirklees, the Grand Central service. For talking about economy and anything like that, if we forget that we have a direct link to London, which is vital for economy and connectivity, then we're doing a disservice to the community and our businesses. So I think, yeah, we need to touch on those, and if officers have any information on the changes of the stopping services, I think certainly you and I would welcome that, and I'm sure many residents would.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. I've been involved in a lot of the discussions around stopping services, and I'll let other people ask questions first, but I will come back in on that towards the end of this discussion.
Right, okay. Rail is not something I'm involved in, so some of my questions might seem a bit naive. You did mention, when you were talking about the 125-mile-an-hour rolling stock, that it was going to be delayed by 6 months because of problems in the industry. Can you explain what you mean by that?
That's with manufacturing the units, the actual orders that have been placed for the new units, they aren't coming through as quickly as they were initially planned. It's production problems, and I don't know more detail than that.
I guess that just begs the question then, is the 30% capacity increase delayed and for December 17, and is the 50% capacity increase predicted for the end of this year delayed as well in that case? I guess, yeah? Okay. Can I ask another one, Chair? So I think it's positive, isn't it, that the 6-hourly trains introduced by the end of this year. This might seem a really naive, silly question, but is that 6-hourly trains leaving Huddersfield to Leeds? Or is that...
It's the 6-hourly train that will between Manchester and Leeds.
Right. And back again? Is that silly?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Do we assume then that that target is probably delayed as well on the 6-hourly trains? Or is it a capacity issue?
Yeah, that is my understanding. So I'll come in with a few things. So I think sticking with this issue that Martin's raised about the other services, I think we have got to recognise that there are some tensions between quick express services between Manchester and Leeds stopping in Huddersfield, possibly in Dewsbury, and the need of people from the more local services. And as Martin says, in my particular neck of the woods, you've got the issues of Slathwaite and Marsden. So the changes which are going to come in, the kind of things that are going to be affected are the fact that the local services will not stop at both stations. So you will not be able to get a train from Slathwaite to Marsden or Marsden to Slathwaite. They will only stop at one of those stations.
Now, just pick up on that. When Darren were asking about the 6-hourly trains, it said Manchester to Leeds, because they don't all stop at Dewsbury now, do they? So are those 6-hourly going to stop at Dewsbury? Do you know how many will stop at Dewsbury?
In the future, I understand that only 2 will stop at Dewsbury.
Right, which I think is a real concern, using that service frequently to Leeds. I know how many people get on and off in Dewsbury, and given the imperative really to look at development in Dewsbury and job opportunities for local people, I think that's a massive concern, and I think it goes against the spirit, the objectives of the document produced this week on transport in the north, and I think it also goes against the government's industrial strategy. So I think these are quite big issues for us that we really need to be taking up within Wicker and beyond, because I think it is going to disadvantage our local residents. Coming back to Slathwaite and Marsden Station, one of the big problems is the fact that at peak hours, the timing of the trains is absolutely terrible. It's it's impossible actually, looking at the projected timetable, for people to commute into Manchester in particular and to get there at a sensible time. You either arrive there very early, before 8 o'clock, or after 9 o'clock, in that peak kind of period from probably about 8:15 to about 8:45, when a lot of people want to arrive in Manchester to get to work in those areas. There are no trains at present. And yesterday, well, there have been several discussions with all the major train companies and with Wicker. Wicker actually have been extremely helpful in terms of listening to the case and supporting it. But yesterday there was a meeting with Rail North where some sort of sensible suggestions from people who are very much involved in the rail industry did seem to be taken on board. So I'm just hoping that when they take those back to TransPennine Express, they will see that they are sensible, practical solutions and something will happen. If that doesn't happen, it's going to cause massive problems. I know that there are people who are living in places like Marsden and Slathwaite, but also people living in places like the Home Valley who commute over to Manchester, who are really thinking about the viability of living in those areas and continuing to work in Manchester. And I think that's going to have a very detrimental impact on our communities and our local economy. I also worry about this when we're looking to develop business in the town centre, business in Dewsbury, Murfield, areas like Slathwaite where we've got the Globe Mill development. If we don't have decent rail connectivity, that's going to be quite a major disadvantage. So I think those things are real problems. You've also got the problem of capacity. There are only going to be hourly services from these stations, and we all know how busy the stations between between Leeds and Manchester are already. Especially when you've got the 3 carriage trains, the ones that are coming from Hull. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was over in Leeds attending a meeting, and at 4, I think it was about 10 to 4 train, it was impossible to get on it in Leeds because it was so full. And that train's going to go through. It's going to be very, very difficult for people in Dewsbury, people in Marsden, Slathwaite, to actually get on those trains and use them. So I think there are some very, very serious issues about the changes to local services. As you say, that's going to be in 2 stages. There's the stage in May with the initial timetable, but then there are further stages there's a further stage in December. So I think we need to look really carefully at what's happening for May, but also look at any problems that arise in terms of what things that are happening in December. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything more about that.
Can I just come back on a couple of things? What we've presented to you is probably the highlights. There is a lot more detail, obviously, within the franchises, which I haven't gone into. These are the highlights. I think you've also got to consider that these sort of initiatives and these measures were sort of debated and set out quite a few years ago. And whilst you talk about Transport for the North and their plans only yesterday, what we've got here is an increase in capacity and an increase in service for the Transpennine generally, which was well needed, and people using the usage of trains and rail has grown incredibly over the last few years. And what we've got here were good measures and good increases on a service which badly need it, but they were debated and sorted out, measured quite a few years ago. And so they are coming through, but I take your point, there's more still to do.
Yeah, and I also take your point that there are some positive aspects of this. I think the greater focus on rail transport is really important, but I think we've got to look at ensuring that when these changes happen, that they have the best possible impact. And I also think we need to argue where we feel that resources are perhaps not going to be adequate to meet the economic and social needs of our area. Yes, Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just sort of picking up on your last point there, I think with respect to what Richard's just said, yes, there might have been debated and agreed years ago, but as a Kirklees scrutiny panel, it's right that we focus on the current and future impacts on Kirklees. And because, again, relating to the rail and transport announcements this week, somebody might come back in the future and say that Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS3 or whatever it's called, was debated and agreed this year. But that doesn't mean to say that it stops us commenting and championing Kirklees in the fact that a major rail scheme is going to bypass our district and therefore the detriments to it. Because when we look later about rail travel and times that the Northern Powerhouse Rail through Bradford will have against ours, it's clear to see where people may be putting their investment in that. So we as Kirklees Scrutiny have to champion that and still try and get what we can from what's left.
Yes, I support those sentiments, but I think we need to come back to the longer term issues after we've moved on to that element of the presentation. So,
Chair, can I just comment on that? I don't disagree with you, Martin, about putting the Kirklees position, but later on in the presentation we show issues about who controls what, and I think it's very important that we understand quite who's setting what franchise agreement, what standards, who's controlling what issues, and the role that the council can play, and not sort of taking the powder from later, but it is more of an influencing role and sort of trying to get things influenced, not decision making, but that will come out later in the discussion.
One final point before we move on to the second point. I think the other service that we haven't mentioned so far is the Penistone line. which is very much a neglected service, and I think it could be of much greater economic and social benefit to the area if there was appropriate investment and a look at how we could develop that service. Okay, have we to move on to the second one?
The second initiative to update you about is the Transpennine route upgrade. In front of you, you have a plan, sort of an indicative plan, showing that the aim of the route is to get journey times between Leeds and Manchester down to 40 minutes. That'll be sort of Huddersfield to Leeds in the sort of 16, 17 minute area, and Huddersfield to Manchester about the 22, 20 minute time scale. So it's a considerable decrease in journey times and improvement in the scheme. It's worth putting into context how vital this route is to Kirklees. It's our major east-west sort of route and rail service that connects us with the major cities of Manchester, Leeds and beyond to the north-east, to the Humber, over towards Liverpool. From Kirklees, with 20,000 people go to Leeds every day, and about 1,500 to Manchester and Sheffield. So that commuting, and that's all modes, that's not just rail, is a real Huddersfield to Leeds is a massive, or Kirklees to Leeds is a massive outflow of people going to work. Huddersfield, you'll be interested to know, covers about 5 million people a year, and it's the second busiest station in West Yorkshire. And really, the Transpennine route is essentially the focus of the rail investment in this region over the next 10 years. There's talk about Transport for the North and their initiatives. We've talked about local issues, but when you look at it, this is where the major investment is going to be in the next 10 years in this area. Just then to give you an update and a bit more detail on it, a couple of years ago, when it was first announced, the Transpennine upgrade was going to upgrade and electrify the full route of the Transpennine, providing extra capacity and more frequent services. And the journey time, as I've said, coming down from about 50 minutes to 40. The current position, because I'm sure you're aware through the sort of political situation, and is that they're now looking at options. And Network Rail have recently sent in to the government several options for this route, ranging from full electrification to partial electrification to even no electrification. As they started to develop the scheme some years ago, Network Rail realised that to electrify it fully, you couldn't just go in and do the route. They had to upgrade the route on sort of curvature and track and distances and supplies for electrical cables, and they found that it wasn't as easy as they thought. So the options have gone in, those have gone in the sort of past month, and we're expecting spring, probably more likely to be summer, that we'll hear what the government think about those options and what funding that they are prepared to put towards it. The indications are that we are knocking around, and from speaking to officers that are probably closer to it in the combined authority than we are, is that a partial or hybrid electrification is probably the one that might get funded. But that decision rests with the government, the options are with them, and they are considering that at the moment. Okay?
Just going back to Dewsbury, because we've got 5 million people use Huddersfield Station a year. Do we have figures for how many use the Dewsbury Station? For how many use Dewsbury rail station? And because I'm not from North Kirklees, what are the bus routes like from Dewsbury into Leeds? Are there a lot of buses that go from Dewsbury into Leeds?
I haven't got figures off the top of my head of usage at Dewsbury. We can get those for you. And there are quite a few services, because in terms of buses that run into Leeds, Arriva are the main bus operator in that area, and they have several that run into Leeds via various routes. And again, details can be provided to you.
Yeah, thanks. Just picking up on Julie's point, I think if we're getting stats later, it would be useful to complete the report if officers can get user stats for all the railway stations in Kirklees. I'm sure we touch on Ravensthorpe later, and there are others, the Mars and Slowitz. The full picture of current user stats, and then we're looking at what we're projecting, would be useful for us to see. The aim of 40 minutes, again, I think for being useful, we need to know what's the average current journey time, so we can see what the impact is on that. The issue of electrification versus something else, while Richard says, yeah, the indications are a favourite proposal. I think it's stronger than that. Along with Councillor Firth and others, I attended a TransPennine TransPennine Express meeting. They were happily telling us that the trains, which we've heard were delayed, are dual fuel. So the rail industry are already buying dual fuel. Now, I don't think they'll be committing to that if we're going for total electrification. The issue about what the mode of travel, and it's a bit of a transport or a rail spotters one about what's actually under the engine, because if you stand on Dewsbury or Huddersfield railway station, the passengers don't turn around to the driver and say, what engine are you using today, mate? They're more interested in the journey time. And I think that's one of the things we should look at. The benefit of electrification is it gives you faster acceleration out of the station. Once you're up to cruising speed, you can switch over onto diesel batteries or whatever. And the issue for us as well in looking at what options are best, and again, without reflecting too much on your area, Chair, is if we go for full electrification of the line, then the Stanage Tunnel will be closed for a heck of a long time while they have to put in all the infrastructure. So what you end up is a lot of downtime on the service while they're doing it, which has a detrimental effect. So I think we need to be looking at what option gives the passengers the best journey time that they can, because after all, well, freight if you're using it as well, but the end is to try and get a faster journey time and a more comfortable journey. So the mode of transport to some degree is slightly irrelevant to the passenger. It's how quick am I going to get there?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so Marty might have answered part of my question, and it was going to be, what's happened in the last 2 years then? We've gone from electrification was on the cards, and now it's been reconsidered. That's my first question. The second question would be, did these options on the second bullet point reach the Department of Transport in December? Because as we've seen, there's many delays already happening, and did that actually happen so that they are actually considering it now? And then my third question, it might be quite early to ask this, but I know Carillion were involved in some way for the HS2 project. Does the changes at Carillion affect potentially what goes on here?
Chair, as you say, we started out with a full electrification intention. This Network Rail started looking at the route, and they found problems of distance in terms of properties near to overhead lines. In some places, for example, I understand at Staley Bridge, they also then found, as Martin mentioned, the TransPennine tunnels, that there wasn't actually room to get in the overhead cables without actually rebuilding the tunnel or even dropping the invert. So you'd have to get the clearance. So they found a lot of engineering problems that meant that in certain parts they couldn't make it full electrification. And that then, as well as the alignment of the track bed, the speeds that they could get up to on the existing route. And with all these engineering problems, they then had to go to a position that said, first off, we need to upgrade the track, we need to upgrade the length, and it won't be possible probably to get electrification fully through. You get a lot of hearsay, you don't get a lot of definite comment from Network Rail, and that's the problem really. I mean, we've had them here, they've come to Kirklees a couple of times to talk to us about the impact of the scheme on Kirklees in terms of what alterations may need to be done to bridges, where they're going through conservation areas, things like that. And we've asked for more details and told them we want them early so we can have a look at them, so we can work with them. And to be honest, it's very difficult getting information out of them. So what we hear is hearsay and suggestions. They might come to a meeting even and show you something, but they won't leave a plan with you. So it is difficult.
If I could just jump in there.
Yeah.
On Friday, when they were making the presentations to Wicker about what was happening, I spoke to the person who was leading the project and from Network Rail, and he did offer that he would come into a closed session of this committee in March when things looked clearer to talk to us about this. So I guess that would be a good opportunity for us as members of the panel, but also a good opportunity for you as officers as well to quiz them about what's actually going to happen.
I'm in correspondence with the lady from Network Rail, again, to try to set us up a similar type meeting, cross-party meeting, for them to come and talk to us. So, yes, I think if we coordinate that, it's a good idea. Yeah. Can I just come back to the second question you asked? Is it with government? My understanding is yes, it has been submitted by Network Rail, and it is with government for them to consider. And the third question you asked about Carillion, and at this stage I wouldn't see, I'm not certain, but I wouldn't see that Carillion would be involved in this at all at the moment. It's too... Was it?
Sorry, I think Dan's question is, were Carillion involved?
Oh, were Carillion? No, I don't know the detail, but I would suspect not.
I think, just to finish my point there, I think it's a real shame that 2 years ago, or 3-4 years ago, when these discussions started to happen, that Network Rail and Department of Transport weren't sharing information properly, Chair. That's my concern.
Yeah, I'm not sure why there has been an improvement, but certainly the impression I've got over the last 6 months is that they are much more open to getting out there and talking to people. I think probably because they've faced a lot of criticism. So, yeah. So they've offered, Network Rail have offered to come along and speak to us within this committee. And we are talking about Kieran Duncan, the guy who's in charge of the project. So it's not some lower person who's coming in. It's the person right from the top who's offered to come in and to speak to us. And they have been very good, actually, at getting out to speak to groups within the community. So in November in Slathwaite, we had a meeting with 90 people there. And we had all the train companies, Network Rail, and Wicker came along to that meeting, and we're very open. And they've offered to come back again in March. We're expecting a much bigger meeting, probably a couple of hundred people there. So they are at least talking to people. And certainly from Rail North, they're stressing that their job is to make things happen. They're about managing the franchises. But there does seem to be quite a strong commitment to ensuring that that is done in the interests of the people within the region. And we've got to hold them to that, really. I think it's up to us to keep questioning them and ensure that they are listening to what we've got to say. Coming back to other issues around this, I think a big issue that Martin, I know you've raised in relation to Murfield several times, is the issue about what's going to happen with station upgrades. Because the upgrades to the station are going to be essential if those services are going to operate effectively. You've related issues such as disabled access, which is extremely poor, in fact impossible in quite a number of the stations. You've also got related issues like parking and also the coordination of rail services with bus services, so people might stop using the cars, get the bus into key stations so that they can then access the major cities. Have you any thoughts on those points?
It's funny you should mention that because just after Christmas when we came back, I had an email from a consultant working for Network Rail that said, please can we come and meet the council and talk about stations. They're doing a piece of work for Network Rail, and they say they're responsible for stations between, a section particularly between Huddersfield and Dewsbury, and they wanted to come and talk to us about the stations in that section and any proposals that we had in terms of road schemes, housing schemes, etc., etc. And that meeting is currently being set up for officers to attend to find out, but I was clear to them that it needs to be a two-way exchange of information, that as well as us telling them what we have in mind, we need to know what their thoughts are in terms of the stations on that stretch and what they're going to do to them, or any ideas they have. And at the moment, again, we haven't got that information. Hopefully, we should get a bit more at this meeting that we're trying to set up.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of points. I'm pleased to hear that Network Rail are coming in. I mean, I've met Kieran as well on site, so they are a bit more amenable. I think we need to look at probably collating. If they're talking on the one hand about an all-party meeting, then to some extent, with respect to colleagues, this is an all-party meeting and it's a formal structure of the council, whether we do it in private session, but it should be held, I think, under the auspices of scrutiny. And the other, with regard to Richard's point, just then about consultants wanting to talk about stations between Huddersfield and Dewsbury, again, it needs to be a three-way conversation. You've got people representing two of those stations here today. The only one that isn't is Deaton. So if there's discussions about stations in Murfield, certainly I'd want to. I'm sure Darren would want to be involved in Ravensthorpe, because those are key impactors for our communities.
Yeah, I strongly support that. I think it's really important. And these things are absolutely critical. I think they're critical as part of the infrastructure linking in with work that we're doing on the local plan, because it's absolutely critical that we get people out of cars to reduce congestion, air pollution, and also to open up better opportunities for people to work in Leeds and Manchester. I think it's absolutely critical.
Shall I continue with a few of them? Just to give us a scale of the sort of impact on Kirklees, I've given a few sort of indications on the next slide. So what we understand, and this is definitive, but the indications, that 92 bridges and tunnels and 8 tunnels will require modification and reconstruction. 10 rail junctions will require to be remodelled, and a significant length of track will need realigning. 4,500 overhead line structures will need to be constructed on the line. 260 odd kilometres of overhead wire will need to be erected for this. And 2 new major electrical feeder stations will also be required, together with digital signalling and over 175 kilometres of track renewal. So it is a massive undertaking, potentially, that this is going to do, and it will take, and we're talking the full Transpennine route here, we're not talking just the Kirklees part. This will take, several years to do, won't be complete till 2025, ultimately. But obviously it will be staged. But I know from the few discussions we've had with them is that in terms of structures and listed buildings, etc., conservation areas, Kirklees is the one, the authority with the most affected structures on the entire route.
One other kind of spin-off from what's happening is to do with the potential of using the fibre networks that they're putting in as well. So I know there are already some discussions. I think work started over in Greater Manchester, particularly in Ashton, but Steve Moore over working for us in Kirklees and within the wider Wicker region, I think are already starting to look at that. So there could be other potential benefits of these changes happening.
High speed 2, sorry. Okay, high speed 2. This is a project again that's led by the government, and importantly, its implementation date is 2033. So we're now then another 10 years further on from Transpennine upgrade. The slide shows you the sort of Y route that I'm sure you're all familiar with, that's been published many times, that shows from London to Birmingham being one route, and then after Birmingham, one line, the sort of the western goes to Manchester, Liverpool and on to Scotland, and the sort of the eastern leg goes through Sheffield up to Leeds and into the northeast. Government has confirmed its support to the eastern leg of HS2 to Leeds. So that's a major sort of step that we've had to get over, because it was debated for quite some time, but they have confirmed that they support that leg. For West Yorkshire, what we need to do then is to establish Leeds Station as a world-class gateway, and there have been plans published by Leeds in the last couple of months, sort of indicative images and proposals of what it would look like, but to try and get Leeds Station as a world-class destination is obviously a key aim for the region. From a Kirklees point of view, the connection mainly to HS2 will be through Leeds. So we need to ensure that our connectivity to Leeds is good, it's fast, it's reliable. And that's where you come back to the improvements to the Transpennine upgrade that we've just been talking about. We haven't also, though, got to forget that some of our residents, certainly in the southern part of Kirklees, may wish to go to Sheffield to try and pick it up there. That's then a more challenging issue, because we only have the Penistone line that you've already mentioned, Chair, and the services on that are very poor, 1 an hour, and it's a very slow service. Certainly from Huddersfield into Sheffield it can take over an hour or more. But it's crucial, if we're going to make the most of HS2, that we really get good connectivity to Leeds and secondly Sheffield. And then looking further on at the opportunities that it brings to sort of the area, we've got strengths in engineering, in manufacturing, and really, if we're going to make the most of HS2 coming to the area, as Kirklees, we need to improve our skills in our communities to make the most of the opportunities and the work that will come in doing this. So those are sort of some of the issues for Kirklees on HS2.
In my naivety again, my concern is, going back to what we were saying about Dewsbury would only get a train, 2 trains in an hour, and we talk about Colne Valley, the issues up in Colne Valley. My worry with this is, if Huddersfield's going to be the station to go into Leeds for the HS2, are we going to get a lot more traffic coming into the centre of Huddersfield? And that adds on to the road network then, and the air quality.
As well as the 2 TPE trains that will stop at Dewsbury, there will be also other local stopping services that stop at Dewsbury. In terms of your question about traffic and more traffic coming in to gain it, again, as in most things rail, they aren't very quick at coming forward with their proposals and plans. There has been suggestion that there might be another station somewhere that would serve West Yorkshire. Transport for the North have just come out and said that they support the Bradford station. That's only in the last week or so. But I do know that before then, certainly the government were looking at whether there would be parkway stations or a parkway station somewhere that could serve West Yorkshire. Parkway is basically where it's a station that's not in the centre of the town, but it might be in a location that certainly big parts of our populations could get to quite easily. So, for example, they were considering, and I'm not saying they've chosen to do one or a proposal, but they were considering perhaps a parkway station that may be able to serve Halifax, Huddersfield, people from Bradford, Dewsbury together. But I think you've also got to look at the timings to get there, because you would be getting there by either public transport or private vehicle, and then, you know, or whether people would want to do that journey, or it's easier to go to the local railway station and get there because it's quicker, more direct, etc. And that's something that they'd have to consider. But I can't give you any definite proposals that they've come forward with.
Thank you, Richard. I think Simon would like to...
Yeah, just a quick point. Wicker are very much aware of that issue about the smaller stations or smaller communities, and I suppose I would probably have to include Dewsbury within that. So what they're trying to do is, through their connectivity study, HS2 connectivity study, is look at the opportunities to connect those sorts of communities back into Leeds. So they're aware of it, and they're trying to sort of redress that balance a little bit. So we just need to keep pushing hard to make sure that sort of work is done on the back of this.
Right, Martin.
Thanks, Chair. And a couple of things there. I mean, the maps that we often see for this, it is a concern, obviously, that Kirklees and Huddersfield doesn't feature as a dot on a map. You know, we're seeing Liverpool, Warrington and places, even Scotland mentioned on HS2, which are not directly connected to it, as a connector. And I think, you know, we should be making sure that Kirklees and the connecting services do feature, because, again, we've seen it at Wicker, and Peter McBride and I have challenged the failure to recognise the Penistone line as a link to a Parkway or other station at Sheffield. Currently, we know the rail line isn't brilliant, but rail lines are being upgraded and invested in. So, you know, with the potential of the push through Barnsley and South Yorkshire, that could gain. And I think one of the points that was made was, if HS2 has got a link at Huddersfield, and that's an if that we need to be asking, is there going to be a direct connection, or are we reliant on using the existing services? Because it's all about connectivity. We need to be building in for the future, not only car parking, as Judith has mentioned, but we need to be linking with what we'll be talking at another meeting about buses and road transport. Yeah, if we're going to have efficient public transport, it needs to be integrated. So we need the bus operators to be putting services that get to rail stations at a time to connect. And I don't think there is that connectivity at the moment. And we'll touch probably on the next slide about Parkway stations and the potential with regard to Northern Powerhouse, which is another time when I think Kirklees has got to making sure its voice is heard.
Yeah, I share your concerns both about national issues in relation to HS2. We don't seem to feature very strongly compared to other communities which are actually much smaller population centres and much less economically important. I think we really need to make our case very strongly there. I also wonder about our local planning in terms of what's happening round the station. I know that, and I welcome the proposals for building some kind of multi-storey car park next to the station. But as I was looking at that, I was kind of naively thinking, should we be doing more about the bus services feeding into that? Because what we don't want is a lot more traffic, a lot more cars coming into the centre of Huddersfield, because we all know the traffic problems that we've got already round the ring road, the main gateways into the town, and we don't want to make that worse, really. I just wondered if there will be any opportunities to look at better integration.
In terms of Huddersfield Gateway Station, the thoughts that we've had are around an increase in car parking and a multi-storey, but also to try and see just what you've said, if somehow we can get public transport, taxis and other drop-off whatever round the back of the station rather than through St George's Square. But those are issues that we have to develop up further and see if we can make them work. But yes, you're quite right.
Okay, Darren.
Yeah, it is a balancing act, isn't it, between wanting to be connected and wanting our towns and villages to be thriving, and then balancing this notion that the parkway system has existed with buses for a long time, hasn't it, with park and rides, and they work extremely well in many cities. One, to reduce pollution in centres, and they don't seem to have much of a negative impact on retail the spend or footfall either. So I think I've never heard that before, the parkway idea. So I just think we need to keep our eye on that to make sure that we don't miss those discussions, because not being involved in these like Martin and Eric are, that if the mood of these things from government is that we ain't going to figure, then we have to figure. If this parkway idea comes forward, we have to figure geographically that it works for us.
I think whilst it was an idea, I think what you've got on the plan is probably more that what they're actually going to do, because you've got to bear in mind it's a high-speed link, and the more stations and stops that they put in, it reduces the speed, it extends the journey time, and therefore, whilst they might have considered it, they aren't really wanting to do it. They're wanting to keep the number of stations down, and that's why you've got very few, and major centres, major airports, things like that. So whilst they might have considered it at one stage, I think it's very unlikely. The next section is talking about Northern Powerhouse Rail, and on your presentation you have there a plan that shows the existing Transpennine line and the Calder Vale line that are our current major rail link between Leeds and Manchester. And the proposal, as you just heard in the papers in the last couple of days from Northern Powerhouse Rail, is to go down to a 30-minute journey time. Bear in mind, Transpennine electrification would get you down to 40, but this would get you down to 30, and the transport for the north recommendation is that one stop will be in Bradford, and that's what's shown on the plan. That's obviously, I think, in terms of timescales, that again is like 2045, so you're talking something that's 30 years away. It's a recommendation on transport in the north, and it's an issue that the government will have to consider and see if it's got the money for and see if it supports. Whilst that's the headline thing, in terms of transport for the north, they have also put forward in their strategy other standards and opportunities, objectives. The next slide shows some of the desirable minimum standards that they were after. That was 2 trains per hour on all passenger routes. For example, that would see a big improvement on places like the Peninsula Line, which we said only had 1 train an hour. Rail directly serves all the North airports, so that would be rail links into Leeds and Bradford Airport. And Sunday and public holiday services to be the same as the weekday into peak. And then with average speeds on long distance routes being 80 miles an hour, on interurban 60 miles an hour, and local routes 40 miles an hour. So you can see the sort of range of ambition of transport for the north, not just on sort of the link between Northern Powerhouse Rail, but on all the rail issues and corridors in the north.
Thanks, Cheryl. I'll start off then. I think, again, from a Kirklees perspective, we have to view this very seriously and very cautiously. As Richard said in his presentation, this has the aspiration to be a faster journey between Manchester and Leeds than a Transpennine route upgrade. So there's a potential that this is going to be, in essence, a new line built, that around the Bradford hub or something like that, you're going to get businesses growing. We need to look at that, about the impact it's going to have on our businesses and connectivity in the future of Kirklees. The potential that we have, and I think that's where, as a council and as members and officers, we need to be out of the traps, is again what's referred to earlier, the parkway concept. At the moment, the lines are showing Bradford. Whether that is into the centre of Bradford and back out is still up for debate, and there is potential that this could be a parkway pulling away from the centre of Bradford, which may or may not be within Kirklees or very close to it, at Chain Bar, that kind of area, or along that line. And I think as a council, both for our economy and for connectivity of our residents. That's what we should be looking at. We've missed out on the alignment because Leeds and Bradford have managed to get this on the table, and so it doesn't go through Kirklees. What we need to be doing now is the residual benefits. Okay, you know, it's going to go through Bradford in name. If it's Oakenshaw area, Lowmore, somewhere like that, which is going to be this Parkway station, then we've got a chance for our residents to benefit. And I think that's where cross-party, from the Town Hall to Whitehall, we need to be making that noise that, you know, let's be at the table at this and see some benefits as and when it comes in the future.
So this would be in addition to the upgrade of the Transpennine line? Because my fear is that it could have an effect on the Transpennine line and then we don't get the 6 an hour.
I think Kirklees has always been very forceful and very said that when we're looking at future rail plans, and we've talked about HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, whatever, we've said that we understand that the Transpennine route upgrade is a given. So that's your starting point. That's where we expect, because that's got to be our #1 priority. We get the most out of, for Kirklees, that route upgrade than we probably do from the other things, certainly. And therefore, our position, certainly to an officer, and I know at a member level, has been, that's a given, that's what we've got to definitely have.
Yeah, I very much support Martin's earlier comments, and I think on Monday when this new report came out about the future of rail service, about the future of transport in the north, I was quite worried. I read through it, and there's very little mention of Huddersfield or Kirklees or Dewsbury. In fact, the only thing I could find is that we feature on the map, which is looking at the central Pennine corridor. We do not seem to be on the radar, really, in terms of being an important economic centre. I think it is something, as a council, we need to shout about. We need to battle for greater recognition, because looking at it, there's this new Northern Powerhouse rail route, and then there's the new route from Sheffield to Manchester. It's kind of an oval, and we're somewhere in the middle of it, and we seem to have fallen out of people's thinking. So I think it's really important that we keep battling for our economic importance and our transport connectivity.
I totally share your view about lobbying for Kirklees and Huddersfield, and that we need to keep at the thrust and the front of it, because that's where all the action is, that's where decisions are made. As explanation a little bit, I suppose, you could say that the Northern Powerhouse Rail is an alternative route for those people that are using the Calder Vale route, because at the moment, the Calder Vale route between Leeds and Manchester takes 1 hour 25 minutes. The route, when we've got Transpennine upgrade, Leeds to Manchester, is 40 minutes. So you can quite see why they've gone for not the Transpennine route upgrade, something else for the 30-minute. But you're quite right, we've still got to lobby, we've still got to try and make sure that the Kirklees, Huddersfield, Dewsbury and all the area business is at the fore. The last section talks about local rail issues, and under there we've sort of highlighted station gateways, car parking needs, and also the Penston line. In terms of station gateways, we have put in an expression of interest for an improved Huddersfield station gateway scheme, which is, as you've probably seen in the paper and the press, is looking at increased parking to the rear of the station. But as I also mentioned, it would be about working with the developer, seeing what we can do, because it's not our land, it's private land. It's also about better access for public transport, better access for taxis, for parking and possibly drop-off, to try and give some relief to the front of the station and the town centre, while still attracting more people into Huddersfield and to use the station. Secondly, we have an LTP scheme that we're currently working on for Dewsbury Railway Station, which is the front of the railway station, so it's sort of around the car parks. It's to better give a welcome and an environment to the front. So at the moment, if you go there by car and dropping people off, or by taxi, it's just a bit of a mess, to be honest. People are milling all over, people reversing, people whatever. So the scheme is to improve the layout and the approach to the railway station, both in car parking, dropping off, and for pedestrians, and to make it easier for people to get there from the new college that will be open and the town centre. And that's a scheme that we are developing at the moment, we have money for, and we are looking to implement towards the back end of 2018. And then, as I mentioned already, the meeting that we're setting up with Transpennine Upgrade and finding out what their thoughts are around the stations between Huddersfield and Dewsbury. There may be opportunities there of something that we can work together with them to improve those stations, both in terms of access, parking, and things like that. Going on to car parking, the West Yorkshire Transport Fund has a range of schemes of improving car parking across stations in West Yorkshire. One of those is at Murfield Railway Station, where people at the moment park on street in the main. There is a small car park at Murfield Railway Station, only holds about 25, 30 car parks. We are looking to improve that, increase that capacity of car parking in 2 locations, up to about a further 125 spaces. Some of that is on Network Rail land, some of that will be on private land, and that's the combined authority are implementing that for us. Also, in terms of the local plan and the new North Kirklees housing growth area, obviously Ravensthorpe Station will be very close to that, and we are looking and seeing how we can connect that to the new proposals in the local plan. I think the discussions with Network Rail, hopefully that coming up in the near future, may give us other opportunities and see what we can do that way. And lastly, I just mentioned the key issue on rail is the Penistone line, where the service is 1 an hour. It's a route that takes over an hour to get to Sheffield. It's a single track with passing places. It's very busy. People use it. It's a very popular route. It's a fairly cheap route. The problem is, if you don't get on or you miss it, you have another hour to wait for the next one. Again, there are parking needs on that route, but if we put more parking in, then that might only increase the number of users and make it even more busy and difficult for people. And it's certainly something that's on our radar and we lobby for regularly, but in the scale of things and across West Yorkshire, we don't get much traction, if we're honest, but we do lobby.
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start off with a point that I made at the start of the presentation about other services and things, that on local rail issues, and for a committee that's looking at economy and neighbourhoods, the fact that we're not emphasising we have a direct link to London, I think is detrimental to Kirklees. We see that the effort that Leeds and others put in to Accenture and Wakefield, with Wakefield Westgate, massive investment there as a direct link to London. The benefits for our businesses, we get people now coming to and from football matches on that now that they're playing in the Premier League and things, so it's something that needs to feature in our economic concerns. And similarly, the improvements to railway stations. I was interested to, Richard, when you talk about the further enhancement of Murfield, about private land, the discussions that have been had over the last 3 years with friends groups, transport authorities and things, has been total use of Network Rail land on both sides. We've alluded to it earlier that Network Rail have not always been the easiest people, and the classic case is they own land at the side of the rail track in Murfield, which had lain derelict for ages, and while one side of Network Rail was talking about enhancements and car parking, the other went in and put a goods yard there, which sterilised that land, which would have been ideal. So it's not been an easy relationship. Looking at potential other things, Ravensthorpe improvements, I think that there may be a potential to look, we've talked about parkway stations. At the moment, and again as Darren will know, Ravensthorpe station is only linked on the sort of Huddersfield Leeds line. A short way away from the station is the Wakefield line. You either have to massively upgrade the rail station, which for a new rail station now you talk about £15 million and you have to find car parking and things. Combine that with the same potential in Murfield, you're talking within a mile of each other, £30 million investment if you get 2 new stations. And I think we should be looking at the feasibility of a parkway station so that both communities are serving as many rail lines as possible. Wakefield, the Wakefield line, the Calder Valley line and things like that. And with somewhere that will take the public transport in and the car parking capacity, because at the moment, Ravensthorpe, unless you massively buy land off the private sector adjacent to it, you've got on-street parking for about 20 cars at most. So the money that's linked, the housing development, I think we need to be thinking innovatively and going for the future, and at least doing a feasibility study. Are we spending the money in the right place on 2 stations, or is there a parkway? I'm not an engineer, so I don't know the answers, but I think it's something that we should be looking at, Chair.
Thank you.
This happens every time.
Judy.
I often go to London through the Brighouse station because it's easy if you live at that side of Huddersfield, but I don't go anymore because I once went and I could find nowhere to park at 7 o'clock in the morning, so I had to come home. Is there any plans to upgrade the Brighouse station at all? Do you know? You've got to look at it strategically, Martin.
Calderdale looking at improving Elland station. Elland. But I'm not aware, well, exactly. But I'm not aware of anything for Brighouse.
Yeah, let's come back to Kirklees. Yeah. Yes, I understand your point. Right, Darren.
Yeah, obviously the developments at Dewsbury are very welcome. One, because we're trying to revitalise the town, but 2, like I said about the colleges and the experience people have at Dewsbury train station has to be smooth. It has to be modern. It has to be up to date. Because if it's not, students and staff invariably, as we all do, it gets under our skin, doesn't it? If the experience isn't good and we're not able to get there comfortably. Ravensthorpe could be a massive untapped resource, whether it's the actual station that we improve or whether it's a parkway scheme. You mentioned the local plan. There's the potential of hundreds of houses going there over the next sort of maybe 20 years or so, and Ravensthorpe sits quite nicely there in some shape or form. So it'd be interesting to see if the parkway idea's got legs, whether there's the land available to do that. It invariably brings upon other issues around increased road traffic coming into that area, but there's again there's that balancing act to be had. So I think Ravensthorpe, hot on the heels of the arguments that have been made for Murfield over the years, I think we're going to start saying the same kind of things, really, that we want to see things happen there, and I think things are going to need to happen there at some point.
I don't disagree with you. I think that was when I was saying we'd see what the opportunities are working with, Trendspan and upgrade. Those were the types of things I was hinting at. So yes, I think that opportunities and feasibility as to whether we can get a better situation between Murfield, Ravensthorpe. The point about if you have a station that's a bit further towards Murfield, you'd serve both the Leeds and the Wakefield line is correct. And yes, there could be opportunities, but we need to know what their plans are. They're the people who probably bring a lot of money to make the investment, and so it's trying to fit that and work that together with them if there's an opportunity.
Yeah, coming back to Martin's earlier point, I completely agree that I think we need to look at what the bigger problems are, the bigger transport problems, the problems of congestion, pollution, the economic problems, the issues of opportunities for people. And we need to come up with some innovative solutions. I think there's a lot of important decisions being made at the moment by people like Network Rail. And it's really vital that we have the conversations with them to look at taking the opportunities that might be available. One of the things that they're very fond of saying at the moment is that they're looking in their investment to leave a legacy for the future in communities. They've said this several times, I think, to people in the council, to local MPs and things. And I think we've got to take them at their word, really. But we've probably got to take the lead in terms of what that's about. So there are all these kind of issues, planning issues and land issues that Network Rail owns a heck of a lot of land in places like Murfield, places like Marsden, where they own a big goods yard, part of a big goods yard site, and it's kind of just not very much happening with it, really. Can we do more with those kind of things? Accessibility, I think, is a big issue. I get really frustrated in the number of times we get knocked back about why we can't do something to make stations like Slathwaite and Marsden accessible for people with disabilities. Actually, the Marsden station's not accessible to anybody unless you're pretty fit and agile, because the access by steps is actually very dangerous. So there are those kind of issues, and then there's this big issue about integration of bus services and train services, because the last thing that we want, as Darren was saying about the possible Parkway station, we don't want even more cars making journeys in areas that are already congested. So we've got to look at these things, I think, in the round, really. Okay, I think it's been a really interesting presentation. Thanks very much, Richard, for coming along and doing that.
Can I just finish?
One more, I think, I want to finish. Yeah.
The last couple of slides just gives you some information about who controls the rail, who controls the decisions around rail. And without going into the detail, I've done there sort of a bit of a quick notes in terms of the franchises, the Transpennine, the High Speed 2, the Northern Powerhouse Rail, and all the local issues that we've talked about. And it just shows you the number of different parties that are involved, whether it's government, Network Rail, local landowners, private people, the franchisees, the Combined Authority, the Transport for the North, and it just shows you how probably the one thing to note is Kirklees doesn't come into it very much in terms of decision making. So it's about influencing, lobbying and getting, talking to people at the right level and making things happen, because a lot of the decisions aren't in Kirklees, they're out of our hands. And that's the point that comes across very much from that quick snapshot, really, information. And I think just the last thing I picked up, there was a quote from The Guardian just the other day about Transport for the North, and it says, Transport for the North will be England's first subnational statutory transport body. It has the mandate to make recommendations, not decisions, but recommendations. So ultimately, in terms of rail, you always go back to Network Rail or the government, and that's some of the challenge, let's put it that way.
Yeah, that was a very useful summary at the end, I think, of the situation. And with a number of these things, ultimately, it is the government that's going to make the difference, isn't it? Yeah. They've got to decide what their priorities are and whether they're willing to commit funding to things. Yeah, and I take your point that the main thing we can do is really try and influence what's happening. But I do think that can make a big difference. Yesterday at the meeting with Rail North, we were told that the local community groups, which are looking at the stations between Stalybridge and Huddersfield, are probably the most effective in the north of England from the viewpoint of the decision makers. And it's just because they're shouting loudly, but shouting constructively and coming up with ideas as alternatives to make things better. And I think if we can do that as a local authority as well, we're much more likely to be listened to and to make a difference. So, yeah, there are frustrations, I think, in our position, but we've got to make, at the hand that we've got to play it as skillfully as possible and to try and make a difference.
Thanks, Chair. Just finally, the bit from The Guardian, which Richard's rightly highlighted, I think I find myself strangely, or maybe not strangely, agreeing with two Labour voices. John Prescott this week was criticising the fact that Transport for the North doesn't have decision-making powers. But I'd link that with what Tony Benn always used to say, that you should never give power to someone that you can't vote out. And at the moment, Transport for the North is not directly elected or accountable. So, from our point of view, they may get decision-making, but we'd see ourselves even further away from it than we are from West Yorkshire Combined Authority at the moment in some respects, which has been criticised by Councillor McBride and others. So it's good to have the decision-making somewhat local, but we need to have influence and accountability on those.
Yeah, completely agree. Right, I think we've finished with that. Thanks very much, Richard. Thank you, Simon, for your interjections as well. It's very, very useful. I think we've raised some very big issues, and this is going to have an absolutely massive impact, I think, on our future as a local authority and our prosperity and potential social benefits. So thanks very much. We look forward to returning to have a look at bus services at the next meeting. Thank you. Oh, no, sorry, roads we're looking at. Yes, sorry. I apologise, yes, it's roads that we're going to focus on at the... I'm thinking of another meeting I've got next week. Right, order please, yes, let's return to our agenda. Thank you. Right, so the next item on the agenda, I think, is looking at our work programme, which I've just made a real mess of, I think, in those last comments. So our next meeting, for the record, is going to be focusing on another big issue in terms of road transport, road developments in the future. I don't know if anybody else has got any further comments on work programme, or Steve, if there's anything you wish to say?
Sorry, Chair. Don't know if this is picking me up yet. What we'll keep doing is just topping up the list of items there with things that you've suggested in the meeting so far. So it's there as a ready reckoner, a reminder when you get to the debates. But you have set aside road for the next one. And there were some questions and extra information you asked for today that we might be able to feed in as well. Okay.
Should add to that as well from the last meeting that the visit to the extra care housing, that is being organised as we speak. Yeah.
Sorry, you're right. From actions from the last meeting, what involved a visit to extra care housing, and I've got the dates that people have sent in, so we'll sort that out after this meeting. Okay, we'll sort that out at the end.
Yeah, and also the reference group that we mentioned, I have been trying to fix up a meeting to plan what we're going to do with that. It has been a little bit difficult with changing roles within the cabinet. I think that's held that back a little bit, but I'm hoping to get that sorted with Steve's help over the next week or so.
We did say that we were going to feed into the consultation on spotted housing, but when does that need to be in by? Have we missed that now? That was something I was really interested in.
No, as far as I'm aware, we have not missed that. And just last night I was talking to Cathy about it. I had a meeting fixed up. Well, we thought we had. It had to be reorganised. So we are on with that. It's not been forgotten. I think it's really important to follow it up. Yeah. And in terms of that, I think it's also important that we do look at opportunities, if they arise, to look at the bigger issue about ways in which we can increase the deliverability, the delivery of more affordable housing, because I think that issue is not going away, and it is a really important one.
Just going back to right at the beginning, just that we don't get too much on, because this is going to finish probably April, would it, or March? So not put too much on the agenda, because then we don't finish anything.
Yeah, well, I think if you stick with the housing issues, really focus on the extra care housing, and I think if we ensure that we've really bottomed the transport things by the end of the next meeting, I think we've asked a lot of quite searching questions. It's obviously a massive issue, this, and it's going to be ongoing. And I think it will be useful to return to some of these real things when it becomes a little bit clearer about what the government's actually going to approve in terms of the proposals. it would be good to try and get other people, as well as panel members perhaps, along to that meeting from across the parties, so that people have an opportunity to quiz rail, Network Rail in terms of what's likely to happen.
And it's a shame officers have gone, because the issue that we touched on last time, the demand for supported and affordable housing, I've started to raise with officers a concern that as the council gets rid of assets, there's one that's coming up in my land, my ward, where they're developing a block of land for 60 houses, which the council will put planning permission on and sell to a developer. That would, from what we heard from Viv and stuff like that, it doesn't need to, supported housing doesn't need to be town centre. This is convenient for bus services for churches and things like that. So the council could be looking at using its asset disposals to facilitate affordable and supported housing, as in the schemes that we'll be going to look at Heckmondwike and that, working with other partners to deliver them. But I think, you know, by just working up a scheme that goes, right, we'll put it out to a developer, build houses, isn't doing anything to address the shortage of housing need.
Yeah, completely share your concerns. I've been looking at similar things in terms of housing projects for disabled people. I think that should be really high on the agenda for the reference group looking at this, and we've got to really question what's happening, look at this in some detail.
One of the other things we did talk about at that first meeting was also they were drafting up the allocations policy, and again we did say we wanted to feed into that, because that is the big issue out in our actual wards, is allocations.
Right. Yeah, good point. So I think when we meet with Cathy Scott, that is something that we can return to. Steve, if you can make a note of that, so that we make sure that so both those things, I think it's really important that we need to record that they are things that we're going to return to. Okay. Right, thank you. Any other business? Okay. Right, thanks very much for your participation this morning. Yeah, and the date for the next meeting, Steve, just remind us of the date for the next meeting.
15th of February.
Yeah, 15th of February at 9:30. Yeah, I suppose for this one, yeah, the answer is yes, but in the future we will look at it. Yeah. That's true, yeah. Bring our sleeping bags. Yeah. Would you like to move the time so it's a little later? Yeah. So, what? 10 o'clock, yeah.